Hey there. Okay, so let's go through this map. This is a map I've created for our imaginary game design, and you can see up here in the top right hand corner this red square. This is the area we're going to be focusing on throughout this course. So we're going to build this section. But before we get to that, I'm going to show you how I sort of put this together, and this will sort of, help you create your own maps going forward, because at the end of this, after this lecture, I'm going to give you a small challenge. Your first assignment is to create a visual design brief and a map for a game that you've made up. I want you to create a visual brief and a map, and the last lecture and this lecture, you should be able to now put together both of those things. You can get this map on this lecture, so download that now if you haven't already, and also in the next lecture you'll get the blank design brief, and then you can start creating your own map. So let's get started going through this. Let's turn off all these layers first. Bink. Okay, so we start with a blank page. The first thing you really need is some sort of scale reference. What you tend to do, or what I tend to do, is sort of focus on an object in the scene that I know roughly the size of, and have a scale marker to indicate the scale, so I can keep everything else in relative scale to that object. So this is my scale meter down here in the bottom, 10 meters, and I've made that based on the size that I've drawn my hut here. So that's a hut, and you can see it's about 15 meters long, which is okay. It's quite a small hut. So that's how I come up with my scale. So that's quite an easy thing to do. Pick an object in your scene, you know roughly how big it is, draw your scale and keep everything else in your scene relative to that scale in the hut. So that's how you do that. So the next thing I do is do a compass, obviously, so you know which is north, east, west and south, and you can use that as reference in your documentation. And then I create a height scale. So this is like anything white on my map is high, anything dark on my map is low. So it's just like topology on a proper, if you've ever read a map, you can see it gets light and dark where it represents hills and mountains, and that's the same principle as that basically. So next layer is the sort of basic outline of the area I want to create. Now initially I thought this was quite small, but on further testing it's actually not. It's actually quite big. So I just paint this down on a separate layer, and I've drawn a little river that goes through it just as a feature, because I want, it's always good to have sort of features so the player can orientate himself. If they're running backwards and forwards, they know the sort of little stream runs through the middle of this scene, and they can sort of orientate themselves using that and other features in the level. So next thing I do is draw sort of paths, because the reason why I put paths in here, it's really good to guide the player around. Paths are really good for pointing the player in the direction you want him to go. Don't have to stay on the path, so you can run off and go that way and stuff. But initially when you come in, you just, what's this down here, and you'll follow the path. So I tend to do that in games. I don't know if everybody else does, but and then when you become more familiar with the area, you sort of go off the beaten track and start taking your shortcuts. And then I put down some sort of markers. Now these here, this is you can see my height map, my height gauge down here, white is high. So I've got this high peak in the middle here, and I'll explain what that is in a minute. And this over here is a cave. That's what the diagonal lines represent. And obviously this cave system is higher than our main terrain here, but I still have a cave at that level in the corner. So that's what the diagonal lines represent. In case you're wondering, they represent caves. And then I put down some foliage, some trees where I want. Now this level will be full of trees because it's a forest section, and but these trees are very specific. I want them there from a design perspective, because what's going to happen is you're going to be able to traverse through the trees on sort of a treetop path up high, out of the reach of any critters that are prowling around the ground, and you'll see why I want these trees in a moment. So next up is our tree path. Like I said, I want to be able to traverse the trees, so you'll be able to get up into the tree in my imaginary game design, run through these treetop paths and get to locations quick. So this is how you get into these high caves. You have to get up onto the treetop paths, run through, and then you can get into the caves that way. And you know, there's shortcuts. And one of the things I wanted for this level was a sort of a stealth mechanic. I imagined my character, you know, creeping through this forest stealthily and attacking prey from up in the trees, maybe using a bow and arrow, and that's what these are going to be used for. Next up, some landmarks, and I've also indicated some treasure spots. So in these locations here, I've put like a little treasure chest. You'll be able to collect an item that's, you know, a resource item or something like that. And this here is the hut that we're going to model and build. And this is a giant tree that's blocking your path from getting out. You can see I've put cave entrances here to represent the caves, basically, just to show you where the entrance is on the map. I also decided that the antagonist in this area were going to be wolves, packs of wolves that are going to attack you the moment you sort of step into this area. And this is why the treetop path is quite useful, so you can traverse the trees without being attacked by these wolves, and you may even be able to attack them from high up. And you can see I've got a red one in here. This is the boss wolf, and he comes into play. If you look at the design brief, this guy, if you kill him, take evidence of his death back to the guy who lives in the hut, he'll give you a nice big weapon that will sort of get you through this exit here. So it's all linked up from a game design perspective. So these are the keys for the icons you see on the map, and these here represent areas of challenge. It's always useful to have. So you can see this area inside the caves, quite a big challenge. Outside the caves, quite a big challenge. I think there'll be several wolves outside there guarding the entrance. The fella Wart who lives in this hut over here is going to provide you with a challenge. It's a challenge to get past this tree, and there's a challenge here to get through this other exit here. So there's two exits to this, but this one's high up, and this represents a challenge in itself. And I put down the numbers because numbers are really useful. When I'm writing a document, I like to reference numbers on the map, so that when you're reading it, you can glance to the map and go, oh yeah, that happens there and that happens there. So it's really useful to go back and forth and see what I mean when I reference these numbers. And then the text describes what each thing is and what all the numbers represent. So there's the entrance down here. This is where you come in, and that's where you go out. But obviously there's a challenge to get through this giant tree here, which is blocking your path, and there's no way up or under it as it currently stands. And finally, this red square here represents the area we are going to conceptualize, and the area we're going to build and model throughout this course. I know it's only a small portion of this, but you'll come to see that it takes a lot of work just to do this area, and a lot of things we build in this for this area will be used throughout other areas, like trees, for example. You can use trees all over this map, and stones and rocks, you can use them all over the map too. So you know, it's not just confined to this area, you can use them elsewhere. But the concept, you can see this little yellow arrow here. This represents the perspective or the viewpoint I want to draw the concept image from. The concept image that we're going to create in the next section, I believe. And it will be viewed from this area here. So that's the map. A really useful tool. You know, you can draw a lot of information from this. If you're a concept artist, you can just look at this and read the visual design brief and garner a lot of information. Apart from reference material, this will be all that you need to create your concept art. If you're working within a team in a studio, you may well be presented with something like this, or you may be given a 3D version. Some designers like to jump straight in and start boxing out levels and and present you with an actual boxed level, so you can actually run around it. And then your job is to, if you're a concept artist, you can grab screenshots of that and then use it as a template to draw over the top of, which a lot of artists do. And if you're if you're a 3D environment artist, you use it to build your objects and place them into that world. And we're going to be doing that later on in the course, so you'll see what I mean by that. Like I said, this map is attached to this lecture, so if you haven't got it, go and get it now, and you can look at it at your leisure. And in the next lecture, I'm going to set you up with a challenge. If you have any questions about this, it's fairly straightforward. I think, if you play games and you buy game guides, then you'll see these in-game guides all the time. That's just it's a standard sort of thing. So that's it for now, and if you have any questions, leave a comment and I will get back to you. I'll see you in the next lecture.